Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Miriam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to get started? Then let's get going. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we head north to Ontario, Canada, to chat with genealogist Christine Woodcock. Christine, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you for inviting me.
Let's get started by having you tell us about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Okay, I started doing my own family research about 14 years ago. My grandfather fathered 21 children, and my mother and my grandmother were the storytellers in the family. And when they passed away within about 8 months of each other, I suddenly realized that the stories that I had listened to growing up were going to be lost if I didn't do something to preserve them. And so that's kind of the springboard that I had for getting involved in genealogy research. And as I was doing my research, it dawned on me that so many people who have Scottish ancestry have never been to Scotland. So I kind of thought about it and decided that that's what I wanted to do. So now I am living my dream job, and I organize groups to take to Scotland annually. We usually go in the spring, and we do genealogy research in the archives in Edinburgh, and it's fantastic.
At what point did you decide to make this a profession? And what experience did you have before this?
Well, I, way back in high school and my early college days, did marketing. Not that I ever used that in terms of my career, but I always had those skills in the background. And I remember from marketing class hearing, you need to find a gap. So you need to find a service that's required or that is sought after but doesn't exist, and then fill that gap. And so I saw taking people to Scotland to do the research there sort of as the gap that was missing that I could fill. Then I decided probably about 5 years ago, that this is what I wanted to do, that I was really passionate about it, and it was what I wanted to do on a full-time basis.
So what were you doing sort of in between, in those years in between?
From the time I started research?
Before you started actually taking the tours over?
I was actually working full-time. I worked in frontline child welfare for 26 years.
Wow, okay, because most people come to genealogy from something else, so I was just curious what that other skill set was that you brought with you.
Yeah.
So what do you think in terms of starting up your own business, being accountable to yourself is a very different thing than working for somebody else? What were some of the issues you encountered or the skills that you lacked when you started your business, either the research business or, taking people over to Scotland?
I think the skills that I initially lacked were really just a familiarity with what was available in Scotland. So I had to, unfortunately, make my way over there and find out firsthand what was available on site that you can't get online. And the other piece was just knowing where to market it all.
So you were kind of forced to go to Scotland for market research, right?
Isn't that awful?
It's yes, terrible. Terrible. So how many trips did it take? How much market research did it take for you to really say, oh, I think I know it now. Now I can start offering tours?
Well, I knew what was available online, and I knew from online research what was available on site, or I thought I did. And so really it only took 1 or 2 trips for me to go and really have a good handle on where everything was, so that now if somebody comes up to me after a talk and says they're looking for a specific record set, I can say, oh, you'll find that at the National Library, or oh, you'll find that at the Scottish Genealogy Society. Whereas before I have to really stop and think about, oh, I saw that, where was it? So I think about 2 trips and I was able to figure that out.
How many trips do you think you've made total since you've been doing this?
Trips with groups or trips on my own? I have family in Scotland, so actually I've been over probably about a dozen times to Scotland, but not for genealogy research.
Yeah, okay. I just meant to Scotland. Have you found any surprises in terms of records? There's what you can find online, there's what they tell you about online, and then there's what you find when you actually go. Have you found anything that was a surprise to you because you didn't know that it existed and they didn't really talk about it online?
I think most of it, actually. Scotland was really the first country to digitize and make their records available online. And other countries have kind of caught up with that. And, we see Ancestry and Find My Past and all those databases coming on. And they really have a passion for recording their national memory and their national history. And so the archives that they have are phenomenal, and they're extensive. And every time I think, they can't possibly be any more, something else comes up and you think, wow, they've even saved that. And now they're making that available. Like they even just the brewery archives and the business archives. And there pretty well isn't anything that you wouldn't be able to find an archive on.
The reason I ask you that question is because I come from New England in the United States, which is a very old part of the country. And we have in each town in New England a little historical society. And these historical societies, they have records that have never been published.
Right.
And that people might not even know about because nobody's cataloged them. Is Scotland much more centralized so that you have a much better handle on the records that are available?
No, it really isn't actually. I mean, there are certainly a lot of records available centrally, and they're now using, so that the main place to do the research sort of for the statutory records and the old parish registers is Scotland's People, which is right downtown in Edinburgh. And there's satellite places throughout the country. They're starting to put that same database and make it available in other centers. So you can get it now in Glasgow, you can get it in Inverness, you can get it down in the borders. But each, just like they have in New England, each community or region has its own family history society, which is like what we call a genealogy society here. And the records they have are phenomenal, and they pertain specifically to that region. So they'll have newspapers for that region. They'll have school yearbooks for that region. They'll have census records for that region. And then if there's any sort of national disaster that has taken place in that region, they've got all kinds of records regarding that as well. And then each town, city, or borough has government archives where you'll get sort of business records, but you'll also get, if they have an institution there, they had an asylum or a workhouse or a poorhouse or a school, then you can get those records there as well. So it really, I mean, there's a wealth of information. But you're right, it really is. You have to get to the location because it all is done regionally. I
find this thing that you're doing really fascinating. And my recent experience is that my uncle, he's, I guess what you call a hobbyist genealogist. He's interested in researching his own family history, which he shares with me on the maternal side. But he's not interested at all in the genealogical community, going to conferences, anything like that. He's strictly focused on learning his family history. We have a family line that goes, they're called the Silvers, and they, Silvers. They came to the United States from Scotland in the 1600s. And this June, he actually went over to Scotland on his own with his wife. And he didn't do research, though. He just he knew where the towns that these places, where the ancestors were from. And I think he just wanted to go and see them. I think he definitely would have benefited from a tour like yours, but I think he just wasn't capable of implementing that much organization. I didn't find out about it until a week before. Otherwise, I might have helped him with it. But how do people feel when they contact you? What are their goals, and how do you set their expectations in terms of what they might have in their mind and what actually happens when they go to Scotland with you? So when people contact me, and I have had people, Marian, who, like your uncle, they have a calling. They have sort of that, that marrow deep hunger that Alex Haley writes about, and the need to go and see their homeland. And they go and they do that. And after they've done that, then they come back and they think, okay, now I'm ready to go and research in the records. So quite often I'll get people who have already they've been to Scotland, they've been to the area where their ancestors were, or where they were known to have been. And then they contact me and they want to come and do the genealogy research. So there's still hope for your uncle in that respect. And when people contact me, they will say, this is my brick wall, or this is what I want to get out of it. And then I can tell them whether or not they're going to in the 10 days that they're with me. Some people, if they're looking, for instance, for records back in the 1200s, they're not going to find those. And so I don't want people to put in the time, the money, and the effort to get to Scotland to be disappointed. I do quite a bit of work with them ahead of time in terms of preparing them. We do webinars, and there's handouts that I give them about the records that they'll be able to access there. And really, I think Scotland
most people who are descendant of Scots, they aren't going to Scotland to visit. They're going home. And so many people, in fact, almost everybody, when they get to Scotland or I meet up with them in Edinburgh, they'll say, I feel like I belong here. I just feel so comfortable here. This is where I belong. This is my home. And there really is that sense of just homecoming. Even though it's not, sort of homecoming year, for them, it's the homecoming experience.
When you are talking about the webinars, are you doing that for the group, all the people who are going on the tour, or do you do that with the people individually who are going on the tour?
All the people who are going on the tour have access immediately to a webinar just on basic research and what they can find and what they can't. And then as a group, I host a webinar it's called Preparing for a Research Trip in Scotland, where they need to go specifically to find the records that they're looking for and what to expect on the 10 days that they're with me.
I think it's an absolutely wonderful use of technology.
I love technology.
That you can prepare them like that. I can see that they can get so much more out of their trip with you because you can do that with them regardless of where they might be.
Absolutely.
At home. Absolutely. Until you said that, it never even occurred to me. But what a wonderful, wonderful concept. I love it. Love it.
Thank you.
I think it's just really well thought out that you go to that trouble beforehand. And I think
like I said, I want it to be a good experience for them. Somebody had said to me, I always send a survey after each trip. And this past one, quite a few comments came back on how important it was for them in terms of their own success to have been prepared ahead of time.
What kind of successes do people have? I can't imagine you can bring down too many brick walls, but I'm sure that people are actually finding information that's helpful to them. How much productivity are they having over there?
I think it depends on what it is they're going looking for. Most people have terrific success. And first of all, most people cannot believe the wealth of information that's available on a Scottish record. When we go to Scotland's People Centre, for instance, we're there for 3 full days over the course of the 10 days, and they can access records as recently as last month. Now, they can't copy them, they can't download them, but they can transcribe them. And for instance, on a marriage certificate in Scotland, you get the name of the groom, you get the name of the bride with her maiden name, you get the name of each mother and father with the maiden name of the mothers, and you get occupations. So you're always one generation back just by looking at a marriage record. And so people, I think, are really quite astounded by the wealth of information that's available. And it really has been a lot of fun. I mean, this year we got into the Kirk Session records, which are the records kept by the church for all of its business. So whether it's, finances or proclaiming baptisms or marriage bans or whatever. And one lady found out that she came, in fact, from a long line of fornicators. And she just thought that was fantastic, that she was able to get that amount of detail on her family and then be able to see. Through that, she was able to find out who the father was of an ancestor that she thought was illegitimate.
Are the attendees of the tour mostly familiar with the records before they get over there?
They weren't, Marion, and that's why I started doing the webinars on basic Scottish genealogy research so that they are more familiar with what they can get.
I'm thinking it would be kind of fun. You could actually do 2 different kinds of tours, continue to do these tours, but you could actually do like a genealogy institute, even for advanced and professional genealogists and, on site in Scotland, come learn Scottish records. That would be...
Wouldn't that be fun?
I think you should do that because that would be something I would go for.
Okay.
And I've been to Scotland already, and I would definitely go and do that. Oh, goodness.
I think I'd have a little bit of competition from some of the Scottish genealogies, but...
Yeah, but are they doing it?
I can incorporate them.
Are they doing that? No. See, this is the point, and if I can just take a moment and make this point to the audience, you can never not do something because you worry about what somebody else might do or might think.
Absolutely.
I had a situation once. I was teaching genealogy classes locally in the towns around me, and I started to teach classes 2 towns away from me. And there was a woman there who's a researcher, and she said, well, you can't teach classes here. And I said, why not? And she said, well, we have this town historian, and nobody, except him does stuff. And I said, well, I don't know him. I'm not from here. I'm going to do it. And I did. I just contacted the local continuing ed, and I taught classes, and it was fine. And I think it's really important when we think about anything we do as professionals in genealogy, never, ever, ever, there is maybe some political things you might want to think about, but you can never stop yourself from doing something because you're afraid of how somebody might respond to it. if somebody's not doing something, like they're not doing a genealogy institute in Scotland, it's fair game. Do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I have, for the most part, I have quite a good working relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my mind's now going a mile a minute. I wish you hadn't even raised this issue, because that'll be me all afternoon now thinking, oh, how can I do that? I would be happy to incorporate them, because, it's one thing to listen to me for 5 days or whatever in an institute, but wouldn't it be great to have some of them come in and kind of share their knowledge as well?
Well, I mean, you can do it that way as well, because I know there's an American, Donna Moody, and she takes trips over to Ireland, teaching, to use the records and kind of working with people. It's the same sort of thing, but I think it would be a really fun thing to actually kind of go and have half a day of like learning about the records, and then half a day actually working with the records, and then repeat the same thing. I could go for that kind of thing where I feel like I'm learning about them, instead of when I walk into a new archive or something where I'm not familiar with the records, it takes me a while to get oriented. And so even as a professional, I would really appreciate that kind of situation, Right.
I actually, a little bit of that is already built into my tours,
Mm-hmm.
So that when we go to Scotland's People, we have the person who is in charge of the Scotland's People Centre comes and does a 1-hour talk with us and talks about the records that are available and how we can access them and what's different there than what we would get online. And the same when we go to the National Library, one of the archivists there meets with the group and gives us an overview for an hour and a half of the different records that are available and what floors and what departments we'll find that in. And the same when we go to the Scottish Genealogy Society. So it's not, sort of a half day. It's about an hour and a half. But we do get that in each repository.
Oh, that's great. That's really good. What was the hardest part about beginning the travel aspect of your business? Was it logistics and figuring out how to do group airfare, or getting everybody to the same starting location, or is it a nightmare, doing the hotel? What was the hardest part? Maybe not any of those things.
So I don't do the airfare, actually. And the reason I don't do the airfare is because people come from all over. And so in order to get like a group discount, we'd all have to sort of leave from the same spot, use the same airline, and return at the same time. And a lot of people, the majority, probably 80% of the people who come, wind up spending extra time in Scotland. So they come and they spend time with me, and then they go and they do their own thing. For a lot of people, it's a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and so there's other things that they want to see. Dealing with the hotels and that kind of stuff wasn't that difficult. I think it was really just getting people to understand that they could trust and that they were going to get a good experience out of it. Just getting people to really be able to take that leap, because it's a lot of money and it's a lot of time invested. It's sort of after I'd done the first couple, it really then spread sort of word of mouth. People saying, oh, yeah, I went and it was awesome. And, somebody saying, oh, I would really love to. And they'd say, oh, well, here, contact Christina. She'll take you. It really was just kind of the jumping off point and saying, yeah, I believe in this and I know it can be done. And then getting the people to actually jump on board with me.
I think it's a lot of money no matter what, whether somebody goes on their own just sort of for the ancestral experience or whether they're going with you, it's a major investment.
Absolutely.
So they might as well sort of spend that time to be getting a little hand holding. Have you ever had a situation over there, any hiccups that you had to kind of think on your feet, unexpected things, and an example of how you might have solved the situation?
I haven't.
No.
I haven't. And I hope you're not asking. No, I haven't.
Okay. I'm not looking for problems. I'm just looking for ways to show people how we overcome problems. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, we get, being a group in a hotel, you always get people who complain about this or complain about that. And really, it's just a matter of letting the hotel know, and they're more than happy to fix it, or, any of that sort of stuff, which I just see that sort of group process, right? But
Mm-hmm.
not a major thing that would kind of stop me in my tracks and think, oh, geez, now what am I going to do?
Do you talk about culture ahead of time? Are most of your group Canadians or?
No, most of them are U.S. based.
Okay.
Yeah, I think part of the fun for me dealing with people who are descendants of Scots or the Scots diaspora is just allowing them to indulge in their heritage and to claim their culture. And, the very last night that we're all together as a group, we go to a ceilidh, which is it's a dinner, and then there's like a variety show that they put on with old Scottish songs and country dancing and bagpipers and the toast of the haggis and everything all kind of wrapped up into one evening. And that really is kind of the highlight of the whole week, I think, for a lot of people, because it just really allows them to claim their Scottish heritage.
When I was a student in London, and there were many people from all around the UK and Australia and everything, we had this rule that if you couldn't understand what they were saying, then they were Scottish. And it usually worked out that way. Have you had any challenges, especially with Americans? I think I see Canadians as a little bit closer culturally to the British. Have any of the Americans had difficulty understanding the Scots?
I think Canadians do as well. I mean, I know,
really?
When I took my husband for the first time, he watched everybody else, and if they were laughing, he laughed. And my family, particularly the men, have a very deep brogue. My son was younger. My uncle phoned, and my son thought he was calling, from Pakistan or somewhere, had no idea who it was or what he was saying, and so hung up on him. And I think for me, because I grew up listening to that I can be the bridge between that kind of what people are saying and then people not really understanding on the other end.
So what's the life cycle of a tour for you? Do you spend the whole year organizing in little bits, or do you just dedicate, say, 2 months ahead of time? I'm sure you're marketing the whole year, but the actual coordination and such.
It is a 1-year process. Usually by the time I am at the end of a trip in Scotland, so sort of the last 2 or 3 days, I've already got people booked up for the following year. And so I come back and I start working with them on an individual basis, as I said, getting them prepared. Sort of the last 2 or 3 months before we go is when I do the group webinar on preparing for a trip. But I give them access to all that stuff in between. And then there's, I have to be coordinating the hotel, and I have to be coordinating the dinner and transportation, and I have to be in contact with all of the archives to make sure that they've got the space for us, they've got the time for us, they've got the extra staff for us. It really is a 1-year process.
I'm sure there are some times that are very high activity for you and other times that are slower. Are you still doing genealogy research for clients in addition to doing the tours?
I don't do research for clients, but what I do is I'm out on the talk circuit. So I see myself as an educator, and so what I like to do is to give you ideas of where you can look yourself for the records. And so, right now it's a whirlwind, right? Everybody's back to starting up their season of meetings and that sort of thing. So I'm on the go a lot with, going to conferences, being a guest speaker at workshops, that kind of thing. And then in between that, I also do writing of articles.
What sort of publications do you write for?
So I write for Moore's Head Publications, which does Internet Genealogy and Family Chronicle. And I've written for a number of genealogy societies. So the Illinois, Utah, Ohio, Alberta, Ontario.
Good. So I don't have to talk to you about writing or speaking because you've already got that covered.
I've got that covered.
You don't need that. You don't need that lecture. That's great.
I don't know.
That's great.
Too funny.
How do you balance your time between paid work and volunteering? Do you do any volunteering?
I do volunteer. I actually edit a number of newsletters for genealogy societies, so that's volunteer based. I think it's important to give back. And so I always take the opportunity. I like to be able to volunteer, kind of fill that need of editor or something that I can do from afar that I don't necessarily have the time to be able to go travel to a meeting and sit in a meeting for 2.5 hours and then come back on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. But I can put a newsletter together from home and be able to fit that in around my other stuff. And so that works out really, really well for me.
And what is the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you can share with us? This can be a writing project. It could be a speaking engagement. It can be a tour. What's the most fun thing you've ever done?
You know what? The whole thing is fun. It really is so much fun. I think that one of the best things that happens when you get a group of Scots descendants together is that they just really have a good time together. And I love going and doing the talks. I find them very energizing. We always have a good laugh out of it. I find the tours very energizing, although I'm exhausted when I get back. Just when you think you're getting into the mundane, somebody will come up and say, "Oh, wow, you'll never guess what I found today." And it's always energizing and upbeat. And I really, really enjoy it. I just think the whole thing is so much fun.
Could you give an example of something that specific that somebody might have actually found over there that they were just sort of overjoyed and did a little happy dance because they found?
Right. So one of the things that I do is I hook up with a colleague over there who does Ancestral Tours. So there are a number of places, if you go online, that will say they give ancestral tours, but they're actually tour companies, And so they'll take you to Stirling, or they'll take you to Edinburgh, they'll take you to Glasgow, but they won't take you to the graveyard that your ancestor is buried in, and they won't take you to the school or the house or the place of work, whereas my colleague will do that. And so I hook up with him, and I then take them to do the research, and Ian takes them for a day and takes them, personalizes a tour for them right to their ancestors' homeland, to their gravesite, to where they went to school, where they lived, that sort of stuff. And so they'll all come back, and, that's when the chatter's like, oh, wow, you'll never believe it, but the house is still standing. And then I've had people who have gone into the records and said, oh my goodness, I didn't know they had a third wife. I found that out by the research that I did today, because the maiden names or the on the death certificate, for instance, somebody will die and then it will list their spouse, but it'll also list any subsequent spouses or previous spouses. There's always pieces of the puzzle that get discovered when they're in the archives.
Are people surprised by the history and surprised by how old the buildings are over there?
I think so. I think in some ways it's just totally mind-boggling. We stay in the old part of town, which has been there forever, right? It's been there. Some of those buildings have been there since the 1700s. And so that's really, it's almost too hard to comprehend. But yeah, and quite often if we're walking over, I sound like I really know what I'm talking about because I've been on so many city tours that I could give them blindfolded. And so I always sound like I'm a wealth of walking knowledge. And so I'll stop and I'll say, have a look at this building, and here's the history of the building, and just have to stop sometimes and drink in the history. It is just phenomenal.
Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
My name is Harold Henderson. I've been an APG member since 2007, and I serve on its board. You don't have to already be a professional to join APG. It's a great place to go when you are beginning to take genealogy more seriously and want to find others who do. There are plenty of chances to learn and ways to volunteer. My favorite is the members-only mailing list for sharing information and asking for help. Learn more about APG at www.apgen.org.
All right, Christine, we are going to enter the lightning round.
Okay.
We are going to pick up the pace, change the tempo a little bit. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
Not being able to get anybody to buy into it, to want to come along with me.
What is the best advice you've ever received from someone else?
If you're passionate, stick with it.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
Find something that is needed in the market and decide how you can make that thing happen for other people.
Do you have a productivity tool or an app that you can share with the audience?
Yes, I use Dropbox all the time. That's where my webinars are and preparation packages. And I use MailChimp all the time.
What is your preferred social media channel?
I have a very active Facebook page called Scottish Genealogy, and I'm also on Twitter, and I use Blogger quite often.
And you're also on Google+.
I am on Google+, yes.
If you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
You know what? There are so many. I think the one that really kind of struck a chord with me was called Island of Wings, and it's about the people on the Isle of St. Kilda, which is 100 kilometers off the coast of Scotland, and just what it was like to live that isolated from humanity.
Now we're going to do tips from the pros, with you being the pro. Since you take people internationally on tours, what would you say to someone who was considering starting a business like this? What do you think they should consider before starting a business like this to ensure that they'll be successful, or to ensure that they'll actually enjoy doing that type of work?
I think they have to consider whether there's a need. I mean, certainly if you're going to Scotland, you're going to England, you're going to Ireland, you know that there's a huge market of people who have migrated to other parts of the world from there. And so you know that there's going to be a large market for you to tap into in order to take people back. For the smaller places, I don't really know if that would be as viable. So I think you need to kind of think, am I looking at a potential market of 5,000 people, or am I looking at a potential market of 50,000 people? And then really decide whether or not you can make it viable from there. And I think that you need to also know what it is that you can offer specifically. I know, for instance, that time doesn't allow me to be the person who is going to take them to the grave site and to the home and that sort of stuff. And so I'm able to partner up with somebody so that my participants get a well-rounded experience, but I'm not the one doing it all. And I think the other thing is really just market. You really just need to get out there and market your business and let people know that you're out there and what they can get from you, and make them understand why it's going to be more important for them to go with you than it is for them to go on their own.
What forms of marketing do you do besides word of mouth?
I do word of mouth. I do talks where I talk about it. I do webinars. I advertise in magazines. I advertise in genealogy societies. I go out and, I'm on Blogger, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on G+, for all of those sorts of things as well.
Wow, so you do quite.
And I actually go to, so I go to conferences and set up booths, display booths in the marketplace. And I also do that, in fact, at Highland Games and Celtic festivals.
That's great. And what kind of personality do you think, what are some personality traits that are kind of helpful to have if you're going to take into this kind of work?
I think one of the most important pieces of advice I've received in my life, I was maybe in my early to mid-teens, and my mom said to me, and I'm not even sure what it was that sparked her to tell me that day, that one of the best pieces of information she received was from her future mother-in-law, and that was the key to life is tolerance. And so when I've got a group of people and they're all different personalities and they all have different expectations and different needs, I don't expect them to fit into my mold, that I can be flexible enough to do my best to accommodate them. And so I think being able to tolerate different personality types and know how to respond to them. And I don't think that you could have somebody who is sort of a OCD kind of person or somebody who is totally a perfectionist, that things are going to go wrong and they're going to happen. But you know what? Let's just do what we can to fix it and move on.
Give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
If you have something that you are really passionate about and you know that you believe in your heart that you can turn that into a business, then by all means do it. Don't expect to make huge amounts of money. You need to be realistic, but by all means do it. And people can get in touch with me through Google+. They can get in touch with me through Twitter at Genealogy Tours. They can get in touch with me on Facebook at Scottish Genealogy, and they can email me at genealogytoursofscotland@gmail.com.
Excellent. Thank you. Christine Woodcock, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today.
Thank you, Marion.
It was great getting to know Christine Woodcock and learning about what it means to be an international tour operator with a focus on genealogy, which is very different from what a normal tour operator would do. There are so many different aspects of running an international tour that we learned about today. I mean, there's the logistical aspects that you need to consider. There are the cultural aspects of the culture of the people in the country that you're going to. There's the research preparation, not only actually doing research preparation, but preparing the attendees for how to do research in the locations that you'll be going to. There's the working on the ground with archive staff and other tour providers so that the attendees get the best experience possible. And then there's also that part of it where you have to learn how to handle diverse personalities and handle unexpected situations, because when you're traveling, you never know what could pop up. So it was very interesting to learn about a totally unique field within genealogy. I would say most of us don't do this sort of thing. There are a few people who do. But there are many things that we can learn from this, and it can really broaden our horizon and our perspective. Maybe somebody might want to learn to become a tour leader themselves, or perhaps, like myself, you might want to attend an international institute. I think that would be a whole lot of fun. As you know, the Genealogy Professional Podcast has been on a break for a little while, and now we're back, and that's very exciting. I've got about, 7 or 8 interviews already recorded and waiting to get released from really, really exciting people. You're going to love hearing from the people that we have lined up. I'm not even going to give you a tease. I'm just going to leave it at that. We had to take a little break just because summer months got a little bit hectic and, all that stuff. Now that it's fall, the cold weather is coming, and here in New England, we love it when that cold weather comes back and the fall kicks in. It's one of our favorite seasons. And for myself, I'm back to more of a routine schedule, so we can proceed as usual and get things back on track, and that's very exciting. There's a bunch of new things that are going to be happening. I've hinted at some of them. One of the things that I had hinted at a couple months ago on Facebook And on Google Plus was the start of a private group for people who listen to this podcast. And so that will be starting in the next couple of weeks. Another thing is that there is now a copy of Finding and Targeting New Genealogy Clients in the shop. That's the webinar I gave back in the spring. And that was a webinar that was just jam-packed with information about how to target and find genealogy clients. Probably too much information in that webinar, but it was a really great overview, a really great foundation for everything we'll be talking about going forward. I know there was a lot of really good response about that. So if you saw the webinar and you'd like to see it again, or you heard about it and you'd like to see it, you can go to the shop and download that now. There will be more webinars coming up. I'm going to try to do them once a month. So the next one in about 2 weeks will be on market research. And I think that's a really useful and practical tool to have in your toolbox to really get your business on track. Another addition to the website is a little tab at the top called Work with Marian. So if you are interested in working with me on a consulting basis, covering topics that we've talked about in the webinars, that option is there now. You can just go to the website and check that out. And so I'm really excited about what we have coming forward, and we're definitely going to bring more information about being genealogy professionals to all of you from some really, really experienced and exciting people. So it's going to be a really great fall. Before we go, of course, we have to do an action item. We cannot forget that. That's the one thing we've really missed, is keeping you on track with action items. In the past, we've talked a lot about prioritizing your responsibilities, making sure that you're focusing on the important stuff first and not on the administrative or overhead things that don't really matter. I want to take that one step further. Not only do I want you to make to-do lists and focus on what you're going to do in your day and which ones you're going to do first. Now I want to talk about email. Email is something that kind of burdens all of us. We have to address our email. We have to respond to it promptly. And I've mentioned in other shows about needing to reply to email queries that you've gotten in a prompt manner. But the problem, the flip side, the ugly side of email is that sometimes it can overtake your life. And you find yourself checking your email every 15 minutes, and you feel like if you don't check your email, you're going to miss something. And that's just wrong. It's a fallacy. So I want you to reclaim your life when it comes to email. So this is part one of managing email, because this is just baby steps. There's just so many different ways that you can handle email, such as organizing and things like that. First, we're going to break that nasty habit of checking your email all the time. What I would like you to do for the next 7 days, try to do this for 7 days, is to pick 3 different times during the day to check your email. And I would suggest that one of those times, the first time of the day, be 10 a.m. Do not get to your computer in the morning and immediately check your email. What you should be doing, as we've mentioned about creating that to-do list, is create the to-do list the night before. Come to your office, come to your computer, and knock out the most important tasks that's on that to-do list. And then at 10 a.m., check your email. Because if you don't do that, if you get to your computer first thing in the morning and you check your email right away, you're going to be off on a fire drill. You're going to be wanting to respond to all the people who have sent you emails. And you're not going to be getting to that really important priority that you set for yourself. So try it for 7 days. Pick 3 times during the day to check your email, no more than that, and see how much more work you get done. 3 times a day is plenty. If somebody is really critical, if you have a project or something that's in a really critical phase, ask those people to text you or contact you in some other way, maybe by phone. So if they need to get to you immediately, they can. And do it that way. But try not to let your email control you. Try to control your email so that you will be more productive and you will focus better and you will get more work done. Until next week, so long.